Hi, my name is Kristen Brock, and I'm going to talk today about standards-based grading and making the switch. I'm going to talk a little bit about the what and why of standards-based grading, but I really want to talk about the how to make it work in my classroom and how to make it happen in my school. And then I'll talk a little bit about what's next. For the sake of time, I'm not going to spend much time on what standards-based grading is. Here are a few definitions from some of my resources. You can pause and read them as a little reminder. And here are some kind of key ideas separating standards-based grading versus traditional grading. You can review those as well. But what I really want to talk about is why standards-based grading is so important. And when I was learning about why, I realized that these are some really important ideas that I'm going to want to make that's going to make changes in my classroom, and I'm going to want to explain it to my students when I transition over. And I want to share those ideas with you. Why is standards-based grading a good idea? First of all, it gives meaning to the grades. A percentage grade tells you some information about the overall performance in a class, but very little about what they're having trouble with. In this case, this student's average would be about a 3.3 or maybe an 85%, which could mean that they're getting 3s and 4s overall, or could mean that they're getting 4s and 1s, which is what we see here. And these numbers give a lot more information than a percentage grade. And really tells the student and parent and teacher what that student needs to work on. It's a good idea because it prevents assessment of the wrong things. Students are often evaluated based on things that have nothing to do with the content or skills being taught in the classroom, like work ethic, participation. And it's not that these things aren't important to document, but instead of making it part of the percentage grade, you could put it on the report in a table like this, but not make it part of the grade, which really should reflect what the child knows and their skills and knowledge. It's a good idea because it helps teachers adjust instruction. This example here, this teacher clearly needs to work on improper integrals with the entire class because not a single person has it mastered. Tells a lot of information. And it demonstrates clear success criteria with rubrics and exemplars and clear indications of what the student needs to do in order to reach each level. It's much more clear where that grade comes from. Now I really want to talk about how to make this happen in my classroom. I watched a webinar called Transition to Standards-Based Grading and Reporting in 5 Easy Steps. Which was a little bit silly, but it was a nice guideline for me to follow, and I want to go over them now. First, you should identify a unit of study and choose standards, and this is something I felt like I was already doing in my classroom. Create assessments that align with those standards. Again, I feel like I was doing that. Here is where I learned a lot in this project. Step 3 is to assess the standards separately according to criteria. Instead of just assigning points to problems on a math test or a project, I really want to assess the standards separately and holistically. Look at that standard and look at the evidence on the paper and come up with a grade just for that standard. And there'll be several standards addressed on each assessment. Step 4 is to award marks. And the important part here is that you are awarding the most recent evidence and not the average. Here are 2 assessments addressing the same standard, and there are a set of grades here. In an average, we'd add all these up and divide by 6, and we would get an overall percentage grade of 3.6, something like that. But standards-based grading says, well, look, this person improved from the first essay to the second essay, and now they have that standard mastered. And so even though they got 2s and 3s on the first one, they deserve a 4 overall. To report these out, the ideal is a standards-based grading, a standards-based report card like this one, where each standard is listed for each subject, and a grade is attached to each standard. But one thing I learned in this webinar is that sometimes you just need to meet the requirements of your school, and that there are ways to turn these numbers into a percentage grade in order to put that on your report card if you're still going on a percentage report card. So it is possible to do it without being full standards-based grading. Now I want to talk a little bit about how to make it work in my school. And now there are whole dissertations and books on this process, which I simply couldn't read for this project, but would like to. So I kind of opted for some Cliff's Notes, which doesn't get into the nitty gritty, but it does give a nice broad overview of the steps that I or other schools might need to take. And the first thing is to come up with a game plan. And do that using backwards design. What is the reporting going to look like? What scale are we going to use? How will each teacher go about gathering evidence in his or her own classroom? And the second step is to build a toolkit of information. As standards-based grading grows, the information supporting it is growing too. So curating a comprehensive place for resources for all stakeholders is essential to keep everyone on the same page and convinced that it's not just a passing fad. And it's important that we model perseverance. In my reading, it was pretty clear that there's going to be bumps in the road and that we need to be modeling the exact habits that we are expecting from our students, to not give up and not abandon ship at the first bump in the road. The second component is to train the teachers. And standards-based grading is a philosophy and a way of thinking and teaching. And quite simply, if teachers aren't on board, it's going to be very difficult. So the first step is to educate teachers in the philosophy, providing readings, doing article studies. And then you need to find out where the staff is and adjust accordingly if some people might need a little bit more support to get there. And then provide that support, provide the professional development in the times that are already set aside for professional development, and make sure that the technology is set up to make that happen and train the teachers. And the last is to prepare the parents. And this is the area that I'm most concerned with, as I anticipate our biggest pushback will be with the parents. The elementary school is standards-based, so I think the transition might not be totally foreign, but we have a lot of parents who have a lot of anxiety surrounding grades. So we need to be stressing the fact that parents and educators are a team with student achievement that's first and foremost in all of our minds. We need to make sure that the report card is readable. Report card is often one of the most important forms of communication with parents. And making this report card meaningful and clear and communicative is what might make or break the success of standards-based grading at our school. And we need to address the future. Parents are often anxious about what the grade means for getting into college. It's important to share that many universities are perfectly fine with standards-based report cards, but we will need to do some research here in Guatemala because many of our students do go on to Guatemalan universities. So we'll have to do that research in order to convince them. What this means to me, I'm already doing a lot of this in my classroom. I don't feel like I have to change a lot. I might even be able to start making some changes this year. But I do have a lot of work to do in my school in order to make a more impactful change to make standards-based grading middle school-wide. I have a few lingering questions. If I do start grading differently this year, what is the best way to satisfy the PowerSchool requirements? Even if I put the standards in as my assignments instead of tests and quizzes and projects, it's still on a percentage averaging system. So that's a challenge that I would need to work through this year before we switch over, hopefully, to standards-based grading in PowerSchool. And another question is to decide whether to have the exceeds section to either award points for the students who are exceeding the standard. This is a debate that I recently learned about between Marzano and Wormley, gurus in the standards-based grading world. Thank you very much for listening, and here is my works cited. Thank you very much.